Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a Thursday evening at Olive Garden, of all places. She laughed a little too easily, brushing her hair back, her phone lighting up beside the breadsticks. When her client's name flashed across the screen, she didn't hide it. She looked right at me, lips curved in that polite half-smile she used when she wanted to make something sting quietly. "You're too practical, Daniel," she said. "You build stability. He builds opportunity." That was her line, the kind that stays behind your eyes long after the table's cleared. I didn't answer. I just folded my napkin, paid the check with my Amex Platinum, and watched the waiter take it away like it was the last act of something already dead. On the drive home, her perfume filled the car, but it smelled different now. Expensive, detached. The kind of scent you wear for someone you want to impress, not someone you already have. She talked the whole way about networking and potential listings, her voice blending with the soft hum of my Tesla Model 3. I nodded when she needed me to. She didn't notice that I'd stopped listening. At home, she opened Zillow on her iPhone, scrolling through million-dollar homes she'd never live in, talking about manifesting success. I just sat there, watching the reflection of her screen dance across her glass of wine. For her, status wasn't a goal. It was a drug. I went to bed before her, something I rarely did. I lay there in the dark, hearing the faint tapping of her keyboard from the living room. She was sending someone a listing. Maybe him. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. The next morning, she kissed my cheek like a routine, then left in her blazer and heels, her Starbucks cup in hand. The front door closed with a softness that felt like an ending. I sat at the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and stared at our joint Bank of America account. The numbers looked the same, but the meaning had changed. Every dollar was a reminder of what I'd built, and what she'd turned into a transaction. That was the moment it clicked. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to stop funding the illusion. That night, she stayed late at work again. I didn't ask where. I just deleted the shared budget folder and closed the laptop. The silence felt like peace. The first real crack showed up on a Sunday morning. She came back home wearing a blazer she hadn't worn to church, saying she'd been showing a condo off-market. Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted just once, toward her phone lighting up on the counter. The name wasn't saved, just a number with no area code. She turned the screen down, too late. I didn't ask. I poured coffee into my mug and sat across from her. The quiet between us felt heavier than any argument could have been. She asked if I was okay, pretending she didn't already know the answer. I just nodded and told her she looked tired. Later that day, while she took a call in the other room, I opened our shared Dropbox folder. There were new files, labeled Client Retainer, Private. Inside were scanned forms and receipts linked to his investment company. She wasn't stupid. She'd kept them in a personal folder buried deep, but not deep enough. What she didn't realize was that I'd set up that shared structure years ago. I'd built every layer of her digital system. I knew every corner. It wasn't the betrayal that stung. It was how predictable it felt, like she'd rehearsed it with someone else before me. I closed the folder, logged out, and sat still for a long time. I didn't feel anger, just a strange, hollow clarity, the kind that comes right before you finally make a decision. That night, she came home with her Starbucks Reserve cup, laughing on the phone until she saw me sitting in the dark living room. She ended the call and said something about closing a big deal. I nodded again. She didn't notice that I'd already pulled the plug on the joint Bank of America credit line earlier that afternoon. She went to bed early. I stayed up and drafted a single document, a clean transfer of assets, property, and liabilities. Everything with timestamps, everything traceable. I uploaded it to Dropbox Sign, but I didn't send it yet. I wanted to see how far she'd go when the power balance shifted. When I finally closed my laptop, I caught my reflection in the screen, quiet, detached, unrecognizable. The man who'd once fixed problems was gone. The one sitting there now was simply done fixing her illusions. The shift started small, numbers on a screen, access permissions, quiet movements no one could trace back to emotion. Monday morning, I woke before sunrise, logged into our Bank of America account, and began rerouting. Not deleting, not hiding, just dividing. Every transaction she'd built her comfort around was tied to my earnings, my name, my structure. And now, one click at a time, I was removing the scaffolding she thought was hers. By the time she came into the kitchen, heels clicking, hair perfect, her Amex Platinum was already set to pending review. She said she was meeting a client for brunch, her tone light, practiced. I asked if it was the same one she'd been consulting for all week. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to confirm what I already knew. Then she smiled, grabbed her keys, and left. After she drove away, I walked through the house, silent, spotless, almost too curated. Every detail screamed performance. The art she bought for ambience, the scented candles from Target, the vase she said looked wealthy. It hit me that I'd been financing a set, not a home. At noon, I met with my attorney. No drama, no confession, just a signed series of forms. I told him to make it clean, transparent, non-confrontational. He said most men wait until they're angry before they move forward. I told him I wasn't angry. I was finished. When I left his office, I drove to Starbucks Reserve downtown. I ordered an espresso and sat near the window, watching the street. Across from me, a couple laughed over shared dessert, easy and unaware. I realized I hadn't felt that kind of lightness in years. I'd been living under a quiet kind of manipulation, the kind disguised as ambition. That evening, she texted me from her iPhone, a photo of a restaurant patio, captioned, "Late client dinner. Don't wait up." I didn't reply. She didn't notice that her card would soon decline. Before bed, I opened Dropbox Sign and completed the signature. The file name was simple, Closure, PDF. It wasn't vengeance. It was a mirror. By morning, her world would look the same, until she tried to pay for it. She found out on a Tuesday night. I was in my office, working through a client portfolio, when I heard her keys drop on the counter. Then the pause, the kind that stretches too long to be casual. Her voice came from the kitchen, tight and sharp, calling my name. I didn't answer right away. When I stepped out, she was standing there with her phone in hand, the screen glowing red with a declined transaction. She said her Amex wasn't working, that there must have been a mistake. I just watched her, the same way I'd watched market crashes unfold in silence. She kept refreshing the screen, panic leaking through her composure. Then she looked at me, finally realizing this wasn't a glitch. "What did you do?" she asked, but it sounded more like disbelief than accusation. I told her calmly that I'd closed our joint account. She blinked, waiting for the rest, an explanation, a reason to fight. But I didn't give her one. I just said, "You'll be fine. You always said you were independent." Then I walked past her and sat down on the couch. She stood there for a while, motionless, before trying to laugh it off. Said she had money of her own. But the truth was right there. Her lifestyle, her clients, her showings, all of it balanced on a credit line she didn't own. Later that night, I heard her in the bedroom, making calls, whispering to someone, maybe him. The words didn't matter. It was the tone, soft, pleading, the opposite of how she'd ever spoken to me. I lay there, still, feeling nothing but distance. The next morning, she left early. No coffee, no eye contact. I watched from the window as she got into her car, holding her phone like it was her lifeline. An hour later, an alert popped up, her attempt to move funds from the closed Bank of America account. Denied. I didn't smile. I just closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the sunlight hitting the floor. Control wasn't loud. It was silent. And in that silence, for the first time, she had to feel the cost of her own illusion. By Thursday, the silence between us had become its own language. She moved around the house like a stranger, her phone glued to her hand, voice lowered whenever she spoke. I didn't ask who was on the other end. I didn't need to. Every word she avoided said more than anything she could have admitted. I kept my routine sharp, clean, deliberate. Early mornings, gym, work calls. Everything predictable, except me. That's what unsettled her the most. She couldn't read me anymore. And when a woman like her loses her sense of control, panic takes its place. That afternoon, I received an email from one of my clients, an investor. The same man she'd been spending those late meetings with. He wanted to discuss a portfolio adjustment. His tone was overly casual, too friendly. He didn't know that his messages had crossed paths with hers in my inbox months ago. Small coincidences that built the pattern I'd refused to see. So I met with him, not as a husband, but as a consultant. He walked in with that same easy arrogance she'd always been drawn to. Designer watch, rehearsed confidence, the kind of man who spoke in numbers but lived on attention. As he bragged about a new property deal, I let him talk. Then I asked a few quiet questions about his funding sources, his holding companies, the way his advisors structured tax shelters. It didn't take long to find the flaw. His empire was built on borrowed time. That night, after the meeting, I uploaded a single anonymous document to an auditing contact. Not revenge, just information. Truth has a way of finding the right ears. When I came home, she was sitting on the couch, barefoot, scrolling Zillow listings like they were escape routes. She looked up, expecting a fight that never came. I just asked if she'd eaten. She said no. She didn't know that while she was dreaming of new houses, the man she'd tied her future to was about to lose his own. I walked past her, quiet, steady, detached. The power she'd spent years performing for had already shifted. Not through anger, through precision. The unraveling began faster than I expected. By the next week, whispers started spreading through her circle, the same agents and brokers she used to boast to about her exclusive client. I didn't need to say anything. The market handled the exposure for me. The man she'd attached her ambitions to had been flagged in a quiet internal audit. No headlines, no spectacle, just silence, the kind that isolates people like her more than scandal ever could. At home, she pretended everything was fine. She dressed up for showings that didn't exist, sprayed on the same perfume, and left with that fake confidence stitched into her smile. But when she returned, it was different. Her phone stayed quiet. The calls had stopped. That evening, her friend Melissa dropped by, the kind who thrived on gossip disguised as concern. I stayed in my office, but I could hear them through the wall. Melissa's tone softened halfway through the visit. Pity. That was new. When Melissa left, the door closed without a word. Later, she came into my office and stood in the doorway, not saying anything. For the first time in months, she looked unsure of herself. I didn't offer comfort. I just kept typing, pretending not to notice. That was when she realized something had changed, not outside, but in me. The next morning, she sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through Zillow again, though this time her hand trembled slightly. The illusion of options was fading. Her client base was thinning, her social circle distancing. I made breakfast quietly, poured her a cup of coffee without asking if she wanted one. She whispered a thank you, almost too soft to hear. Later that day, I received a message from a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd been at a networking event. He said her client had been avoiding everyone, calls going unanswered, investments frozen. The system had reset itself. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just closed the notification, looked around our house, the same house she'd once bragged about owning, and felt nothing. She used to crave admiration. Now, the only thing following her was silence. And I didn't need to lift a finger to make that happen. Her silence didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, shorter calls, slower mornings, longer pauses between words. The woman who once filled every room with noise now moved like someone afraid to be noticed. I didn't press her. I didn't ask what happened to the investor, though by then I already knew. His accounts had been frozen, his properties under review, his name whispered in boardrooms with a tone that meant, keep your distance. She started staying home more, scrolling Zillow without speaking, like a gambler replaying old wins. Her laptop screen reflected in her eyes while I sat across the room reading reports, pretending not to notice her watching me between searches. She didn't say it out loud, but I could feel the shift, the quiet realization that her step up had turned into a fall. That night, she tried to start a conversation. Said she'd been reevaluating priorities, that maybe she'd taken things too far trying to build something of her own. I listened, but didn't respond. My silence wasn't anger, it was distance. She wasn't used to it. For years, she'd fed off my attention, my reassurance, my steady energy. Without it, she looked smaller. Later, she came into my office again, hesitated at the door, then asked if I still wanted her to sign the documents. Her voice broke slightly on the word still. I turned to her, calm and measured, and said it wasn't about wanting anymore. It was about what made sense. She nodded and walked away without another word. The next morning, she brewed coffee before I did. She set a cup on my desk, unsure if I'd accept it. I didn't move it for a long time. The gesture was too late, too quiet. I spent the afternoon reviewing final approvals from Dropbox Sign. Her name was there now, neatly typed, perfectly aligned beside mine. No tears, no scene, no resistance. It was the first time she'd ever finished something without trying to control the ending. And maybe the first time I saw what peace could look like. Not loud, not victorious, just steady and still. It was strange how quickly the world stopped orbiting her. A few weeks earlier, she'd been the center of every conversation. Her listings, her clients, her polished charm. Now, even her phone seemed to forget her number. The same friends who used to flood her inbox with dinner invites went silent. In their world, reputation was currency, and she'd gone bankrupt. I kept my distance, not out of cruelty, but clarity. She needed to feel the quiet. It was the only thing that could reach her now. Every morning I left for work in the Tesla, same routine, same calm pace. She'd stand by the window sometimes, not saying a word, just watching the car fade down the street like she was finally realizing how easily something solid can disappear. One night, she broke the silence. Said she wanted to talk, to understand what happened. I let her speak. She talked about pressure, about wanting to matter, about how she'd mistaken admiration for love. I listened. Then I said nothing. Sometimes, silence answers better than words. She waited for me to react. An argument, a question, anything. But I'd stopped living in her emotional economy. There was nothing left to negotiate. She left the room quietly, shoulders curved inward like someone who finally realized they weren't in control anymore. Over the next few days, I noticed her moving slower. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling through Zillow not for new listings, but for distraction. The ambition that once drove her had drained out, leaving only reflection. On Friday, she came into my office again, holding the envelope I'd left weeks ago, the one with our final documents. Her eyes were red, but her voice steady. She said, "I signed everything." I nodded, thanked her, and turned back to my screen. She stood there for another few seconds, then whispered, "You really didn't need to disappear." I looked at her once, calm and distant. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected." She didn't respond. She just nodded slowly, as if that line finally made her understand the one truth she'd ignored for too long, that I was never leaving to punish her. I was leaving to remember myself. After that night, the house changed its rhythm. She stopped pretending. No more fake calls, no carefully staged photos for social media. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that sits heavy in the air and turns every sound into an echo. I'd see her sitting on the couch in the mornings, scrolling through her phone like it could still connect her to the world that had already moved on without her. Once, I came home and found her surrounded by papers, contracts, listings, half-finished plans. She was staring at them like they belonged to someone else. She said she didn't understand how everything fell apart so fast. I didn't answer. She knew. She just didn't want to say it out loud, that her empire was built on borrowed confidence and other people's admiration. A few days later, I ran into Melissa again at a Starbucks reserve near the office. She didn't notice me at first. She was talking to someone about my wife, about how no one wanted to work with her now, how the story got around. I didn't interrupt. I just paid for my drink and left. Some things didn't need defending. Truth was already doing the work. That night, I found her sitting in the dark, the glow from her phone lighting her face. She wasn't crying, just staring. She said, "Everyone's pretending they don't know me." Her voice cracked on the word everyone. I stood there for a moment, then said, "Maybe they're just seeing you clearly for the first time." She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, like someone realizing the mirror had always been there. They just never looked long enough. I didn't leave the next morning. I stayed home, worked from the kitchen, and watched her move through the house like it wasn't hers anymore. She picked up a photo from our wedding shelf, stared at it, and whispered something I couldn't hear. For the first time, she didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not help, just silence. And in that stillness, surrounded by everything she'd tried to build, she finally looked small enough for truth to fit beside her. The morning she left was quiet. No fight, no tears, no packed suitcases slammed shut. Just a note on the counter beside her empty coffee cup. It said, "I'm staying with my sister for a while." No signature, just space. I read it once, folded it, and slid it into the drawer. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clean. I didn't chase her. I didn't even watch from the window. I just sat there, hands around my mug, letting the moment breathe. There was nothing to fix anymore, nothing to hold together. For the first time, the house felt honest, stripped of performance, echoing with something that sounded like peace. That afternoon, I drove downtown, parked the car, and walked into a small Starbucks reserve. The barista knew my order by now. Same drink, same quiet corner. I opened my laptop and looked over my accounts. Everything balanced. Everything separate. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was equilibrium. A clean ledger, both financial and emotional. Later, my phone buzzed. It was her, not a call, just a short message. I'm sorry for confusing power with love. I read it twice, then locked the screen. There was nothing left to say. She'd finally reached the place I'd been trying to show her all along. Not through arguments, not through punishment, but through absence. When I drove home that evening, the sun was low, cutting gold across the dashboard. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the Tesla cooling down. Everything felt still, calculated, final. Inside, the house was empty. Her scent lingered faintly, but even that was fading. On the table sat the finalized documents from Dropbox signed, the ones with both our signatures. I placed them in a file, closed the folder, and set it aside. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Some endings don't need closure. They just need clarity. And in that clarity, you don't win. You just return to yourself. The account was closed. The noise was gone. And in the quiet that followed, I realized I hadn't lost her. I'd finally stopped losing myself. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.